Markus Sabadello. I asked him to talk about his topic here because I think there is actually a very important relation between identity and how to make it distributed, and networks and how to make them distributed. So please, let's have a warm round of applause for Markus.
Thank you and hello. I'm Markus. Thank you, Paul. I live here in Vienna. I have a small company here. It's the fourth day, right? And this is right after lunch, so I don't know what the energy level looks like. At least half of the people are staring on the screen, so will be my responsibility to try to not make this too boring. So I have to say I don't have a background really in mesh networking. I played a little bit with Batman in the past, but I don't really know much about that. I've been working on topics and technologies a little bit more on the higher level, specifically the topic of digital identity. Means who are we, or who do we think we are, and how do we present ourselves, and how do others see us and perceive us online in the digital world. There's this famous cartoon, right, on the internet, Nobody Knows a Dog. He Knows You're a Dog, in 1993, and since then a number of communities have tried to figure out how digital identity should work. This is the logo of one of the conferences. This is trying to address this topic for more than 10 years now, and like Paul said in the introduction also, there's a certain movement or certain evolution or certain interest to make identity, digital identity on the internet more decentralized, more distributed. So basically people are trying to do on the higher levels, on the protocol and architecture level, trying to do what you've already been doing successfully for a long time with decentralization. So to move to something that people tend to now call sovereignty, or I am in control as an individual. Right? We know the corporate new oil of the 21st century, and so on. So this is about really fundamentally rethinking who we are when we go online. And I have a pretty long list of sort of the evolutionary steps where we start with highly centralized identity, Microsoft Passport, login with Facebook, and so on, and several attempts and initiatives in between. And nowadays a lot of people are looking at completely decentralized identity. People are looking at blockchains and other things. But I thought instead of going through every single line in this slide and being too boring, like I said, the energy level is maybe not so high. I thought I'd maybe try to tell a little story and do some interactive drawing. So when it comes to who we are and what others know about us when we go online, for a long time we've been thinking in defensive ways. So if this is me and I'm on my laptop and I try to access a website, we know the website tracks me, right? The website has cookies, the website knows my IP address, the website uses fingerprinting technologies and so on. So we thought maybe we build something like ad blockers, right? Or browser plugins that protect our privacy. Or we also said if they track our IP address, then maybe we use something like Tor, where we go from one node to the other, do some onion routing so the website doesn't know who we are in the end. It's a defensive way of thinking, right? And we said if we exchange messages, if this is my friend and we want to exchange some message, we know men in the middle can track everything we're doing. People in the middle can read all the emails that we're sending. So we said maybe we use something like our email. But these are these are, like I said, really defensive mechanisms trying to protect us from attacks. And now more recently, the last few years, we're really trying to rethink fundamentally what an architecture for digital identity should look like. So we said, this is of course incredibly familiar to you. We said instead of building centralized systems such as Facebook and so on, we're building more decentralized networks, and not just on the physical layer, not just building mesh networks for the transport layer, but building something like diaspora instead of Facebook, right? And we said maybe today when we go online and we share our identity, we use some kind of web service provided by a company. Let's say this is Google, and Google has a big database, and let's see, this is Google Docs, right? So I don't know who uses Google Docs. Maybe you're using some pads or something else, but a lot of people use Google Docs, and today the place where the application is and the place where the data is always the same, right? This is Google, they run the application, and they also have all the maybe we can make it so that the application and the database can be separated in an architectural way, so that I can use an application, and I tell the application where to go to use my data, use my digital identity. This is known as unhosted. If anyone knows the unhosted project, where I can choose my own place where I store my identity, and then applications would be asked to connect to that, rather than those things being together. And when it comes to interacting with corporations, right? So a company like Amazon, when we interact with them and we go shopping, and they have a big database called like a typical classical CRM system, customer relationship management system, and in the database they have an entry for every one of their customers, and everyone has an account in the database. I have an account in the Amazon database, and everyone else who is a customer has an account there, and this is where all the data lies, and they specify the terms and conditions under which I can use the service, right? So there's the idea also to invert that, to have a system where I, as an individual, I have some kind of storage. You sometimes call it a personal data store or a personal cloud or an identity container, but some place where my digital identity, my data is stored that I choose, and then when I interact with companies, rather than them having a big database with all their customers, I would have in my database, I would have entries for each one of the companies that I want to interact with. There's an idea known as VRM. So instead of customer relationship management, I as an individual, I do vendor relationship management, and I could specify the terms under which they can connect to me. I can specify the rules under which they are allowed to use my data and do business with me, right? Rather than me clicking on a checkbox, I read the terms and conditions, which of course I never do. I could do that in a different way. So the bottom line of all of this is that today we have something like this, where we have the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons. They are the big players, and we are like these little bits, these little circles. As you know, this is in technical terms also known as a client and server architecture, but maybe the only reason why this is called client and server is because master and slave didn't sound so good, right? But that's really what it is. If you compare this to a political system, this is a little bit like in medieval times, the kings and the lords in their castles, and we are their servants, and completely dependent on what they want to do to us. And so the idea of this sovereignty, digital sovereignty, would be for me to be the big guy architecturally, and everyone else being under my control and living under my rules and having to connect to my identity. One quote that we sometimes say in this context when we talk about this is René Descartes, the philosopher, who said, "I think, therefore I am." Right? He didn't say I register on Facebook and therefore I am. But I think, therefore I am. It means identity today on the internet is always something that is given to me. I'm always an account in somebody else's database, but it should really, identity should really start with me creating it, and then maybe adding things. Creating the architectures and the protocols and technologies to try to make that happen. But identity is complicated. Identity, even in the physical world, is not easy to define. Right? What's identity? Is it my name? Is identity my name? Is identity my social security number? Is identity maybe a list of attributes, right? My home address, my phone number, my date of birth? Or is identity my biometrics, right? My iris, my fingerprints? Or is identity something maybe given to me by the government, right? If I say I'm a good brain surgeon and you have a medical problem, you can trust me to take care of your tumor in your brain. That's not a part of my identity that I would control, but that's a part of my identity that a trusted source like a government would attest, right? So identity is not always something that just comes from me, but also something that is given to me in the form of attestations. Or is identity something that others say about me, right? Maybe my friends. If my friends say I'm a reliable host at Airbnb, then maybe that is also part of my identity. And this is, I think, therefore I am, is also very Western individualistic approach. In some other cultures, in the African, Kenyan Ubuntu philosophy, they say, I am who I am because of who we all are. So that's an approach where identity is dependent on the community. I don't have an individual identity without a community giving identity to me. So this is not easy, but identity, I think, in a digital world is it's the basis for everything. Without identity, you cannot have relationships. Without identity, you cannot have exchange messages or share data or have things like reputations and trust. By the way, this is a very, very interesting relationship, identity by a government. And identity, right? In Austria, for example, in other countries, I think as well, for example, it's illegal not to have a name. If you have a baby and you don't give the baby a name, then the state will assign a name to the baby. And while in Western countries, like here, we tend to be over-identified. There's too many parties, too many companies knowing too much about us. In other parts of the world, people tend to be under-identified. There's an estimated more than 1 billion people in the world who can't legally prove who they are, who don't have a birth certificate, and then they lack access to education and protection from the state and things like that. So this is interesting part. So this sovereignty, me being in control, we try to define. One is control, right? I want to be able to control, to be in charge. Who knows what about me? Another one is consent. I want to be able to be informed every time somebody uses some of my data, everybody uses some of my identity. This is also important in the new data protection regulation. We said we want context, so that means with different kinds of interactions, with different kinds of relationships, I want to present myself in a different way. If I'm at work, then I want to, and I log into my company's web server, I want to present myself in a different way than if I late at night and at home I play StarCraft with my friends or things like that. So I have these different contexts or different personas. Want portability, so I want to be able to take my identity, my information from one place, move it to another place. We want persistence, or rather choice of persistence. So sometimes some kind of information I want to be there forever. If the university says that I've successfully studied computer science, then that's a piece of my identity that probably I want to keep for organization. So any comments, questions so far? Before I go on, maybe I will. This is kind of high-level thoughts. I would also talk a little bit more about more technical things, but I thought maybe some comments at this point.
At first, thanks for the talk. It was really interesting, but I missed, I think, the first moments or minutes. You are studying media philosophy, or what's your field of studying, your personal?
The question was my background, what my field of studying. I studied computer science here in Vienna at the Technical University.
And you are working on implementation to solve the problem?
Yeah, so I'm working. Okay, let me go back to my slides on a few projects, and I'm going to talk about one of them. It's called Souvereign. It's a kind of a blockchain or distributed ledger technology specifically for identity, and I work on a protocol, a technical protocol called XDI, it's Extensible Data Interchange, and I'm working a little bit in my spare time on the Freedom Box, which maybe you know about. But I don't know, in general, I've been in this area of digital identity for more than 10 years. At some point, I discovered this workshop, the Internet Identity Workshop. It's twice every year in California, and I've been there many times in the last 10 years, and I've sort of followed a lot of the things that have been happening in this space.
Thanks.
But yeah, I don't have like I said, I don't really have a background in mesh networking so much. Yeah.
One question. In the slide that you were showing and in your presentation, on the last slide, there is a passage between user-centric and digital sovereignty. What's the difference, actually?
So in this, the difference between user-centric and self-sovereign or sovereign is maybe not so much. Maybe it's equivalent. Historically, self-sovereign, this idea is pretty new. People started talking about that maybe 2 years ago, versus user-centric. People have been talking about that for more than 10 years. For example, the first version of the OpenID protocol, that was all, people were already using the term user-centric, right? OpenID came from the blogger community. People said, if I'm a blogger and I want to leave comments, I want to comment on 20 other blogs, then I should not have to create 20 different accounts, but I want to have one account which belongs to me, which is user-centric, and I use that to log into all the 20 different blogs. So that was 10 years or more than 10 years ago, OpenID 1.0. A little bit later, OpenID became a very centralized protocol used by Google and Facebook, but that's a different story. So these earlier ideas or initiatives, they were called user-centric, meaning that I have a central place where I manage my identity, and self-sovereignty is maybe just a little bit more modern for a similar idea, and maybe a little bit stronger. So self-sovereign or sovereign identity really means a kind of digital identity that nobody can take away from me, that I control with my keys, and I can take it from one place to the other, and it's not an account that somebody else creates for me. But it's just a small difference. So I was planning to talk a little bit more about, I don't know how much time do I have? Okay, yeah, then I'll talk a little bit. This was sort of the higher level ideas, but maybe I'll talk a little bit more about some of the implementation ideas or some of the things that are happening right now to try to realize that. So I will just draw one more diagram, maybe with an idea of what an architecture could look like. If we want digital identity, digital communication that is completely sovereign and not controlled by anyone, then what are the pieces that we need? What are the components that we need? So that's me with my device. So I probably need a few things. I need some place where my identity is stored, where my digital identity is stored, a place that I should be able to choose some kind of server, maybe a Freedom Box, right? Maybe a home server. Let's say this is a Freedom Box, a personal server. This is where my digital identity can be stored. It's in here, and I can control it, and I can choose it. And then, so a lot of people are looking now at blockchain technologies. This is a blockchain. It's a chain of blocks. It's a little bit like the Olympic rings, but without the rings. So why is blockchain interesting? Because for communication, we need identifiers, right? When we communicate, we always have some kind of name or number to communicate. We have IP addresses, we have email addresses, we have domain names, we have usernames, we have user IDs. So usually for making connections for any kind of protocol, you need some way of identifying the other guy, for identifying the participants in the network. And right now, all these identifiers, everything is somehow centrally managed, centrally controlled. If you think you own a domain name, your own domain name, it's not really your own domain name, right? You don't own it, you're just renting it from ICANN, and in theory they can take it away from you. Also in the physical world, my phone number, my address, these things are all centrally managed. So people are looking at blockchain technology to create something called a DID, and I will talk about that a little bit more. Decentralized identifier. I think that can identify me and my friends, and so these are my friends, and these are the companies that I want to interact with. So to create a network, have some kind of identifiers that are decentralized, but that can be used to find each other and connect to each other. And then we basically need some kind of protocol, right? Some kind of transport. Well, protocol on different levels, right? We need the physical transport protocols. That's what you people are doing, right? Also the higher level protocols for the semantics. How are we interacting? Is this HTTP? Is this XMPP? Is this SMTP? There are some protocols, for example, Solid. If you have time, look that up. It's a Tim Berners-Lee's project, social linked data to try to do decentralized identity. So maybe these are, roughly speaking, the components, right? A sovereign transport layer, a sovereign server where I can store my information, a way of creating identifiers, and then a protocol for connecting and exchanging data. And I can talk a little bit more about one project that is trying to do this part. It's trying to do a platform or a system for registering identifiers. So it's called two acronyms. What do them? DLT, distributed ledger technology, is a fancier word than blockchain, but basically the same. And SSI, self-sovereign identity. So this is a blockchain technology or distributed ledger technology, and I'm done with the drawing now. Specifically made for identity. So it's not Bitcoin, it's not Ethereum, it doesn't have smart contracts, it doesn't have a cryptocurrency, it has just one purpose, registering digital identity. And what this provides, right? A blockchain is a distributed database, which in theory is not owned by anyone, and with Bitcoin you use it for as a distributed database for transactions or financial transactions that people agree to. In this case, we can use the same blockchain mechanism for establishing a decentralized consensus on identity. Okay, here's some of the terms again: self-sovereign, independent, decentralized. It's all. Here's a list of projects that are trying to combine the blockchain space with the identity space. It's a pretty large list, almost new initiative trying to do identity on the blockchain. But here's how you do not build identity on the blockchain. Maybe I'll start with number 4, right? So you don't put personal data on the blockchain. I don't write my email address or my phone number on the blockchain, because once it's there, it's public. Everyone can see it. I can't remove it anymore. But basically, the way it fits together, blockchain and identity, is for registering an identifier. I can create an identifier for me. I can register it on the blockchain. I may want more than one identifier. This is the idea of context, right? For different relationships and different personas, I want different identifiers. If many people want many identifiers, then the blockchain has to be fast and efficient. And maybe this one is a little bit controversial. So in blockchains, there's a difference between permissionless and permissioned, right? Bitcoin and Ethereum are permissionless. That means anyone can run a node, right? I can set up a Bitcoin node on my own, and it will be part of the Bitcoin network, and there's nobody can stop me from doing that. Permissioned means that there's some kind of control of who runs a node in the blockchain network. There's some kind of governing body. There is an organization. There's some kind of process that says we select a certain set of nodes distributed around the world that will together run the blockchain. And Souvereign is an example of that. So not anyone can run a node in the network, but anyone can use it. So that's this other distinction. Is it public or private? Can anyone interact with the blockchain, or is it just a complete private blockchain like some banks are doing? For example, banks are just doing blockchain in their own community. But Souvereign fits here. So there's a limited set of nodes in the network, but anyone can access it. Anyone can use it. And this is currently in an early stage. There's a non-profit organization that is governing that is selecting the nodes that will run the blockchain. Now, which is really bad, it should be distributed globally. But that's the background, and so the specific function of this blockchain. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering about the permission public. So you're selecting some people to participate. I was wondering why you decided between having something that you just control versus something that's a public blockchain. Why did you decide to do this kind of model?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? If it's permissioned, addiction with sovereignty, who can say you can be a node and you cannot be a node, so maybe that's not completely sovereign. But I think there's some things to be considered, right? Even the so-called permissionless blockchains, it's well known that Bitcoin is not really decentralized the way people sometimes think it is. There are a small number, 3 or 4 Chinese mining pools who can basically manipulate every transaction in the Bitcoin network if they want. Sync power, and whoever has access to the largest amount of electricity has the most power in the permissionless network, right? If you're China and you have or US too, have enormous resources, then you just run a huge Bitcoin node and you will be stronger than everyone else. So the idea here is that it's better to have some kind of human governance layer, to have a foundation with some people and some rules, that say this is how the network works, rather than leaving it up to whoever has the strongest capacity. Another, I don't know who, Ethereum community, I don't know who was discussion, right? Some people said there should not be a hard fork because Ethereum has been described as this unstoppable world computer, and once it's running, nobody can turn it off. So if we do a hard fork, it's not really consistent with what was promised, because now somebody did interfere with it. But others said something has gone very wrong in this blockchain, so we have to do this hard fork. So it was basically a decisions, and here in Souvereign, the decision was that there should be a human layer on top of it that can make decisions in some fundamental decisions that would not make decisions how it runs. Of course, both can go wrong, right? Human governance can go wrong, and machine governance can also go wrong. I had an interesting conversation with Paul a while ago when we were talking about this. Do we want to have problematic human governance in the worst case, or in the worst case is machine governance, algorithmic governance worse? If you're a pessimist, you may end up with the question, do you want to be governed by Hitler or Skynet, right? What's better? Do you want a malicious human dictator, or do you want a bad machine governance? So before I run out of time, I do want to talk a little bit more about this technology. So this is what the DIDs look like. This is what these identifiers look like. This is what you can register on the Souvereign blockchain. It's a URI, but it's a URI that you can generate yourself. So this is basically a hash of a public key. So you can create this identifier completely on your own and add it to the blockchain, and nobody can stop you from doing that, and nobody can take it away from you. And then based on that, you can build all sorts of protocols. You can if I give you my DAD and you give me your DAD, then we can find each other, and we can send messages, share data, build any kind of protocol that we want, essentially, but based on these identifiers that no one can take away from us. Yeah.
I have a question on this. To upload my hash of my public key, do I need to register, or is this anonymous completely?
No, this is anonymous. You don't have to register anywhere. This is just like creating a Bitcoin wallet and then submitting a transaction to the Bitcoin on your device. You create one of these identifiers on your device, on your laptop, or on your phone, and then you just add this to the blockchain. You don't have to create an account. No. What is the permissioning on the layer? Who can add something to the blockchain? Well, the idea, the goal is that anyone can add these identifiers to the blockchain, and also as many identifiers as you want. So if I want to create 20 different identifiers on the blockchain, and I can add 20 to that, of course, then the problem is spam, and how do you prevent Sybil attacks? How do you prevent spam? How do you prevent people just registering billions of identifiers? And that's the idea is here to have some kind of invite you to add your identifier to the ledger. But that can be done with cryptographic zero-knowledge proofs, so that later you don't know who invited you, right? So I can invite you, I can give you this cryptographic token, then you create this DID, and your identifier together with the token I gave you, you use that to add yourself to the blockchain, but nobody knows who gave you that invitation. Yeah, something like the ID mix, right? Jan Kamenisch at ETH Zurich, it's kind of, it's also known as the Kamenisch-Lisanskaya signatures, I think, but it's basically that. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, this whole idea of sovereignty. Do you want anyone to do whatever they want? Yes, but you also have to prevent abuse in some way. So this is what you can, should I stop maybe soon in a few minutes, or people are not sleeping? This is what you can add to the blockchain. So you add this identifier, and associated with the identifier, you can add a few very limited set of information. So you don't add any personal data, you don't add your list of friends or any of that. You add your public key. Basically, number 2 and 4 are the most important ones. You add public keys. So you could think of this maybe also as a replacement for key servers, for PGP key servers, right? I just give you my DID, and you don't look me up in a centralized key server, but you look me up in the blockchain, and you will always get my public key. My public key can also change. I can rotate it, but the identifier stays the same. And in addition to public keys, I can store URLs where you can then interact with me. So, like I said, the purpose of the blockchain is only to register identifiers, and then the locations or the means or the protocols through which you can contact me. So I can write there, here's my identifier, and you can contact me through XMPP at this address. So you can look up my website at this URI. So these pointers where you can then start interacting with me. That's what it does. And that's about it. I'd be interested in some discussion, maybe how this is on a high level, right? Starting my higher level of the internet protocol stack. How do I create an identifier that only I control? And what the mesh networking community has been working on for a really long time is maybe on the lowest level, on the physical level, sovereignty of my communication without being dependent on somebody else's transport infrastructure. So maybe these things are complementary, right? Thank you.
Someone having a really urgent question right now? Otherwise, let's move it to after the talk. Okay, so next talk is in 5 minutes.